What is the history of metal and horror?
Let's find out.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another great episode. We got a legendary one for you today. Today, we got Mike Schiff, the Bronx-based legendary producer of the history of metal and horror. Yes. And of course, this is a labor of love and long in the making. Well over a decade ago, Mike was going to conventions and realizing that there was this natural crossover between horror and metal, the two genres, and he was very curious to find out more. And searching the internet and searching all the avenues that he could, well, let's just say he was wanting for knowledge and starving for knowledge. You just couldn't find any real information on people talking about the crossover between metal and horror. So like all driven and creative people do, he took the reins himself and he decided to make a documentary on that very topic. And the resulting product is almost a feature-length documentary. Actually, no, a feature-length documentary. Actually close to 2-hour documentary featuring the biggest names in both the horror and the metal genre, talking about the genres as well as the crossover between the two. It's an extremely interesting documentary. I must also say that I'm super excited because, well, Mike and I go way back. Mike is an old friend of mine from the 90s, from the old Bronx Net days, and I even convinced him to find some old footage of us, which we're going to show you today. So, as I like to always say, because I cannot do this alone, it ain't about me. It's about we. So everybody, put your hands together for the following gentleman, for who with metal and horror, that dude was through with it before you all knew what to do with it. The one, Moet. I think you're going to want to be seated for this one. The only Mike Schiff. Yes, Mike.
That's probably the best intro I've had so far.
Well, we take pride in preparing to give the best intros for our guests. And of course, you deserve it. I mean, geez, this documentary was what, 20 years in the making, it seemed?
No, luckily not that long, but yeah, 6.5 years, which is plenty.
Yeah, exactly. So, Mike, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the documentary, I just want to say that, I've been a YouTuber now for 2 years, and it was crazy. On some of my first Son of Sam videos, all of a sudden I got a comment on there, and it said, "Hey, weren't you with Mike Schiff on Bronx Net back in the old days? I love you guys' shows." And it was such a crazy thing to hear that, because it had been like 25 years, and people still knew about your show, my show, but you were a real legend in the Bronx at Bronx Net, and that's how we met. So talk about those days and sort of getting into the whole scene with TV production, and I'll cue up some of the old Bronx Net stuff for the audience to see.
Yeah, I think it was, 1997? I started the public access thing.
It was 97.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of sketch comedy writing in college, and then because I was already doing production, I figured, since I already had cameras, I can edit, I might as well just write some comedy sketches and put together a whole show. So, I did that for a couple of years, and you and I met along the way.
Right.
And we started doing some stuff together, and you had your show, I had my show, and then we worked together, collaborated.
Yeah. We met because
This,
I got what was it, Optimum or Cablevision? I don't even remember at the time. And Bronx Net was the public access show. And I
yeah,
remember turning it on one day and seeing all these crazy dudes. You had long hair back then, Nestor Velasquez Jr., and everyone was seemed like having the best time. And I said, I want to do that. So I made it my business to go and meet you, and we became fast friends. And pretty soon we were working on shows together. You had me working on all your shows, and it was great. I remember being out one night, passing out. You used to give parties, I remember. And I remember we went out to the trains one day to give out like invites to the party, and it was crazy. Like everyone knew you on the street. And you remember that night?
yeah, yeah, yeah. We hit the streets a couple of times by the train stations and handing out flyers. And yeah, it's funny to like step out of my building and have someone yell my name and the name of my show. At that time, it was weird. Even I'd go downtown, I go to the movie theater, and the guy working behind the register would be like, "Hey, don't you do that show
Yeah.
on Bronx Net?" And so that was surreal and crazy, but yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, and it was such a great resource that we had because we had access to all these cameras and all this editing equipment. But you had already sort of been into this already. Like you had already sort of knew by then that film was and TV and production was something that you were very interested in, right?
Yeah, I mean, since I was a kid, I think it was in junior high. My friends and I, my friends Miguel and Juan, were at 143. They actually had a animation program, part of their art program. So we were doing like claymations and pixelations and all that kind of stuff. So that was sort of the first time I started working with cameras, and then I got my own video camera. My parents got me one, when I was probably like, that was maybe the same year, about 89, 90, I think it was. And
Hmm.
then started shooting a lot of my stuff with my friends and family. A lot of horror stuff, of course, because horror was my main thing. That's what I wanted to do.
Right, and we'll get
And
into that in a minute.
yeah, then high school, went to JFK in the Bronx. Lots of film programs there. They even had a horror film history class, which is pretty unheard of.
See, that's
Uh,
crazy. What did you learn in that? I mean, obviously the history of horror, but what was the teacher like? I mean, who was the teacher of that class?
he was cool. He was kind of reminded me of Zachary, who did the Chiller Theater. He's kind of an older guy. Um, and had kind of a very serious demeanor, but very cool guy. And it was fun because I remember on the first day of class, he was talking about all kinds of horror films, which a lot of obscure stuff that a lot of people wouldn't have heard of. And they'd say, he'd say stuff like, what was the first vampire movie, or what was the first Frankenstein movie, or whatever it was. And I'd have the answers. My hand would be up for like everything, because I was like the only real horror fanatic in class. Everyone else was taking it just for a credit or because they thought it would be fun. But I
Right.
actually knew, I knew what I was talking about, because
But you were hard. You were hardcore.
I was
You were like,
hardcore.
yo, I'm not messing around here
I didn't
because
play.
no, we're not playing at this game. Even at that early age, you weren't playing the game now.
No,
But
so I
you
knew what I
had
was doing.
but you had been so how did it come to pass that this young Mike Schiff at the age of 17, 16 at JFK is knowing all the history of horror? How did that come to happen?
Just from watching movies at home with my dad. My dad got me into it when I was really young, because he was a huge horror fan
Hmm.
growing up. In the 30s and 40s. Watching all the original Universal horror films, and then later the Hammer horror. House of Horrors, and Curse of Frankenstein was his favorite, and we'd just be watching stuff. He'd be watching stuff at home, and I'd just kind of catch it. It didn't
So
bother me.
so it wasn't like your dad was saying to you, sit down, this is important stuff, you have to study this. You just were absorbing it because you wanted to hang out with your dad and you were enjoying
Yeah,
like it was that
yeah. It
type
was
of thing.
just there. It was like music he listened to. He just turned it on. I was in the room, and I'd pick up on it.
Right.
So it was kind of the same thing. And then once he saw that I had an interest in it, then we'd rent movies together, and then go out to the movies, and in the theaters, and watch movies that way. So we're both big into horror. So we do that together, which is cool. So that's kind of how it all started when I don't even know how old, maybe 5 years old already. I was kind of being exposed to some horror stuff at home. And
Wow.
then
Now,
they take me to like Six Flags and other amusement parks, and they'd have the haunted mansions, and my dad would take me there. And when I was really young, I'd be kind of scared, but then at the same time, I'd want to go back in
uh-huh.
when we were done. So that was like really, really early on that I was exposed to it.
Right. And so you talked about renting movies. Now, I don't know if we ever spoke about this. I'm sure in the close to now 25, 26 years that we've known each other that we have spoken about this. But did you ever go to Roberta's in Yonkers?
You took me there a couple of times.
But
All right,
that wasn't.
that's
But that
how
wasn't
I
your
knew about
normal.
it.
But that wasn't your
No.
normal video rental place, because, I mean, we were blessed with Roberta's. This was a place up in Yonkers that had like all the most obscure movies. They had the most obscure horror movies for rent. I mean, I was rocking Basket Case, Mother's Day back in the day. But where did you get your stash? Like, where did you rent your movies from, and that kind of stuff?
There were two spots. There was a place down on 238th Street, off of Bailey Avenue, I think it was. So they would down there. They would have like dollar day at the video stores on Sunday. So I'd go down there every Sunday and rent like 5 horror movies and just binge on those. After that, there was one even closer, just down the street, on Sedgwick Avenue, right next to the Chinese restaurant that used to be there, and
oh, no kidding,
and the
really?
candy store right across from, I guess it was Seatown at that time or whatever. So that was even better because it's even closer. So I'd be there all the time too. So right after school, I just go straight to the video store to see what they had. And,
right.
So I when I think about those days, I feel bad for the new generations growing up because they'll never know what that's like. Like everything is just streaming, and you just like whenever you want it, it's just right on your TV. Just pull it up. But back in those days, you go to the store and it was fun.
Exactly. I was going to say the same thing. As I was thinking the exact same thing when you mentioned that there was a sense of adventure going to the video store, because at least the first year or so, you never really knew what you were going to find. You were just looking at the interesting covers. And now it's not like that. Now people kind of know what they want, and then they go seek it on the web. But there was that element of surprise, and I never would have seen half the movies. So like for me, I don't know if you ever got into them, but I was heavily into John Waters back in high school, and I never would have seen those Pink Flamingo movies or Desperate Living or Female Trouble. I never would have seen those had I not been going through the crates of the obscure cult movies at Roberta's. And so I never heard of those two video stores. So they had good selection.
Yeah, the one I think they probably had an equally good selection, I think, and browsing in video stores was a lot more fun than browsing, on Netflix, where you're just kind of scrolling through pages.
Right.
Like, to actually have physical copies where you can pick it up and look at the back and everything, and you're like really skim through the shelves. I thought was a lot more fun.
Right. And it was social too, because you could go ask the clerk about the movies, and they kind of knew, and it became this whole social thing. I mean, I loved going to Roberta's back in the day. It was like the best spot, because that's all me and my friends did. Like, you and I didn't meet until I was in my early 20s, I believe. But in high school, that's all we did with me and my friends, just watch movie after movie. But go ahead.
I think we might have picked up Faces of Death or Traces of Death. Roberta's
at one point. Yeah, Roberta's always had the hardcore stuff. Yeah, they had Faces of Death, and I remember getting that there too. But it's funny that we're talking about the old days, because horror movies weren't really shown, from what I remember, maybe really late at night. But on the TV, it was always like kung fu movies in those days. I never remember seeing the horror genre, so you had to kind of rent these movies in order to see them. But am I wrong about that? Did you know of any shows that were out back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, like even Sundays, even Sunday afternoons. I think Channel 5 might have had some. Channel 9, Channel 11 definitely had some horror films going on. Nothing too crazy. I mean, it was a lot of the older stuff.
Right.
But yeah, there was a ton of, and there's a whole section we can get into also in the documentary where a lot of the musicians talk about being home, on those days and watching those channels, and
yeah, exactly.
Show theater and
no, in fact, I kind of want to
Sunday morning movie, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we'll show that in a few minutes once we get into the documentary, because as I said, you really have the cream of the crop. I mean, all of the top names in both metal and horror are in this documentary. So what I want to kind of do is briefly get us from how you ended up in that high school class at JFK to behind the camera directing and filming, Kirk Hammett, Alice Cooper, John Carpenter, Gunnar Hansen, all these amazing legends. But before we get into that, let's show the audience, let's grace them with just a short little reel. I didn't even edit this for continuity or anything. This is just 4 little clips of the old show In Your Eye that that Mike used to do on Bronx Net. And if you look really, really carefully, guys, you will see a person that you may be familiar with. Give me a second here. All right, here we go.
Okay, guys, at the edit room, just be sure you cut that out, okay?
You just killed me.
Serious incriminating evidence against me, all right? So,
Hey guys, how's rehearsal going?
Not too bad, Tony.
Yeah, we should have the album ready in a few days.
Well, you play very well and all, but the bagpipes kind of throw the song off.
I choose C.
God bless Patty.
Now, wouldn't we all like to choose C?
So yeah, the old Bronx Net days, they were great.
Yeah, there's a lot of context that's missing there, but I don't think anyone really wants to be bothered with the
Exactly.
with the wonderful acting of some of our friends back in those days.
Exactly. But, watching those for the first time in 25 years, it brings back so many memories, of course. And we saw my old place where I used to work up in Dobbs Ferry there. And so really cool and fun stuff. So, all right.
Oh, but someone has mentioned something about the jacket. I still have that leather jacket, that MC jacket.
Why am I not surprised that you still have that? You keep everything, man. And as you know, I keep nothing.
You keep nothing. You empty out your entire living space full of cool stuff.
I can't tell you.
Have.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much I regret getting rid of certain things now. But anyway, all water under the bridge. But so after Bronx Net's over, because it kind of got not salty at Bronx Net, but it became difficult to do Bronx Net because they kept on giving us poor editing times, like 3 a.m, and it just became untenable to do the shows. So you ended up kind of as a freelance videographer for many years, and then you ended up somehow working for Howard Stern. So take us through that journey briefly, and then that'll get us to the beginning of the documentary.
Yeah, I mean the Bronx Net show, I think we wrapped up probably around 99, 2000. Yeah, it was just getting too hard to do, and people were donating their time to help us put it together, and no one was getting paid, so it's like, how much time, how many more years can you really put into something without getting paid for it? So
right.
So I totally got it, and it was the time to wrap it up. So I just freelanced, in production for years, working as a production assistant, and then getting my own jobs as a shooter and editor years after that. And then through my friend Carlo, who I met at martial arts class, we did a Jeet Kune Do course together in the city. He at the time had worked for MTV. We, became friends, stayed friends. Then he was good friends with Doug Goodstein, executive producer at the Howard Stern show. He had been with Howard for years, over at the E! Show. So when Howard moved to satellite, he started a new TV show. So he started Howard TV. And so my friend Carlo called me up. He said, hey, Howard's starting this new TV channel. Do you want to come on as a freelance editor? I was like, yeah, freaking absolutely. Because I was a Stern fan. So started freelancing for Stern, working nights. Then I started shooting, and then eventually I became a producer at the Stern show. So I was there for probably 7.5, 8 years. And through there, I became good friends with Richard Christie, who's an amazing drummer. You've met him.
Right.
I think you came to one of his shows with Charred Wells of the Damned. That's his band. So he introduced me to a guy named Rob Lucas, who's currently out in LA. He's got a studio out there doing really well. And he, for years, was very well connected in the horror business and metal business and everything. And he's like best friends with Tom Savini, and just spend years at the conventions and doing all that kind of stuff. So Rob and I became friends. We actually connected well at the Metallica show at the Apollo some years back. I think that was probably 2013. And the Stern show at that time was already wrapping up. Howard pretty much, got done with Howard TV, so we were out of work. So it gave me a lot of free time to do other projects. So Rob brought me on board to do the Tom Savini documentary, do some shooting for that, and then after that, he called me up. He said, "Hey, Kirk Hammett is doing his own convention out in California called the Fear Fest. Kirk Hammett's Fear Festival." And so Kirk wanted to put together a weekend of live music and just bringing in horror, personalities and metal personalities. That photo's actually that's from the second one back in I think that was 2015. The first one was 2014. So after the first one, they brought me on board to do some camera work, help out a little bit, and that was amazing because I had full access to the whole place. Got to hang out with Kirk and a bunch of other people, Corey Taylor, John Fod, Charlie Benante, and all these guys. So, go ahead, were you going to say something?
No, well, I was going to say, did you meet? Because I know that you filmed Metallica when they came to Howard Stern, but did you?
Yeah.
But you probably didn't really socialize with them at all there, did you?
No, I mean, and that was
Yeah.
probably my favorite day working at the Stern Show, being in studio with Howard, with Metallica performing live about 8 feet in front of my face, which was like ridiculous.
Yeah, I know.
So
it's amazing.
that was pretty surreal. So I got to meet all the guys, got to meet the band for the first time, but didn't really get to like hang out and chat and everything. So this convention, that was the first time I really got to like hang out with Kirk and just shoot the shit and just have a good time with those people. So after that convention, I was talking to Rob. I said, "Hey, has there ever been a documentary made on the connection between heavy metal and horror?" He was like, "No." I was like, "All right, well, between all the people that we know, maybe it's time to put one together." So that's how it kind of came about, and it was, not too hard to do in a way because I already had all the production equipment to do it, as far as on a technical level. But between all the people that we already knew, we had enough people to get started, with people like Tom Savini and Chris Jericho and everyone else.
Right.
So it just kind of went on from there. And that was it. Then, for some people, I had to reach out to management, see if there was any interest that way. Sometimes going to horror conventions,
Right.
just going from table to table and letting them know about the project and just getting a bunch of interviews over weekends and things like that. Then there was a lot of traveling to people like Dave Mustaine's house. I flew out to him, to Alice Cooper's place. So there was a lot of different kind of situations there.
Right, and I think that this is actually a really good for young or for anybody who wants to do something creative and who is interested in putting together some form of project. I think this is actually a really inspirational story because this project came about really as because of your hard and really decades of hard work that you did, or 15 years of just slaving in the business. I remember all the times that you were out until 2, 3 in the morning doing video shoots. And this was after you and I would because we worked together in the percussion rental business for many years, you and I. And you were, that was a hard business. We were driving all around the city, working late at night, early in the morning. And I remember quite often during those years that you were out filming all day long. And so one thing led to another. You ended up at Stern, you met the right people. And then all of a sudden, when you get this germ of an idea, you have the infrastructure now to put it together. I think this is very inspirational.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I was just so fortunate to have the connections, that I did, because if you're starting from scratch where you have no connections, you don't have friends in the business, it's really hard to start something like that, and to start reaching out, just making cold calls to management or trying to reach out to celebrities directly. I mean, it's
a fool's errand, bro.
Yeah. I mean, it took me 6.5 years with a lot of the connections that I had.
Right.
So it's a tough thing. And for other people, it's like, if you have a huge budget, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars, then things come a lot easier. You can hire a full crew, get things done so much faster, and have people fly out to you or whatever you got to do.
Right.
So when you're working with limited funds, especially, it's that's the challenge. That's of course, one of the challenges I had, and just scheduling is really tough.
Right.
Just,
So now the topic itself, the history of metal and horror. So of course, here's the great front cover of the DVD. By the way, Ruby, if you're out there in the chat, and I see you, by the way, and also, by the way, thanks to everybody who's watching. Really appreciate it. Great vibe in the chat I see tonight. Ruby, if you wouldn't mind linking to Mike's webpage, where it'll take you to a site where you can either buy the DVD or Blu-ray straight up, and Mike will send you a copy of it, and you can buy autographed ones, special packages. But also you can stream this now on all sorts of streaming services. So Ruby, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat every now and then, and we also have the link in the description below. But this is a great front cover, and of course your documentary has already won like tons of awards. This is insane. But the topic itself, why did you feel that this was a topic that was worthwhile of a documentary?
I mean, first of all, being a fan of both metal and horror, it was fun for me to put together because I love both, and I know that they're fans of both metal and horror. I mean, it's like if you're a fan of one, you're more likely than not to be a fan of the other. So I know that there was an interest in the topic, and once I started putting the word out, it gained a lot of momentum, and a lot of the magazines started doing stories on it. This was when I was just getting started doing crowdfunding. So I already knew ahead of time that this was something that a lot of people would probably want to see. So, and I didn't really know for sure until I cut my first trailer and then put that out there and really started the first round of marketing. So,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, for years, I had known, since the 80s, I knew that there was this connection between metal and horror. I mean, going back to, like the Elm Street films, Elm Street 3 with Dokken, and a couple of other soundtracks, music started to become really important, not just scores, but like actual songs, with bands performing and stuff.
In the movies themselves, or are you talking about like music videos? And
no, I mean, like music videos, of course. Alice Cooper was doing scary music videos for ages,
right.
And King Diamond, of course, was doing that. I mean, so many musicians brought horror into their performances. I mean, that's been going on forever. But then with movies, especially, it was more in the 80s where they started incorporating a lot of that. And you'll see, like, the best example is a movie like Trick or Treat, with Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne. I think at that time they knew that this connection was there, and they wanted to make a movie where you really brought that together.
Right.
I mean, and you don't bring like Gene Simmons and Ozzy into a
Ozzy,
horror film,
right?
Unless you want to kind of really establish that connection and make the fans happy.
And of course, say what you will about Gene Simmons, the dude is a genius level businessman. So if he was involved in that project, it meant that it had some form of potential. But yeah, I mean, I've always been into metal. I've always been into horror. I never really thought about the connection between the two. But this is a really interesting documentary that you have made because, and we don't want to give too much away. We want people to actually go see this documentary because it has, well, so many really legends of the business. We have Brian Slagle here. We have, is this the guy from Ghost, right?
Yeah.
And we have Corey Taylor from Slipknot and Marky Ramone, right? That's Marky?
That's Marky.
Right. And we have Phil Anselmo. I mean, all these amazing people. We have Dave Mustaine talking about horror and metal, and Gunnar Hansen. Now, who's this guy?
Gunnar played the original Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw.
Right.
Rest in peace. Unfortunately, he passed away.
Oh, he passed away.
A couple of years.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about doing a project that takes a couple of years. Is like, people start to pass away. So we lost 3 people already in the film since then. But it's life, unfortunately.
Here's one of the biggest names in horror. This is John Carpenter. And for those who don't know, what's he responsible for?
Oh my God. I mean, The Thing, Halloween, Prince of Darkness, In the Mouth of Madness. I mean, like some of the biggest horror films, of horror film history, of course. I mean, when you think horror director, John Carpenter is like the guy that everyone thinks about. So
right.
We were lucky to get him on board.
And so the way that you broke up this documentary was you give a history of horror. I believe that's what starts it. Then you give a history of metal. And then you bring the two together about how horror and metal merged over the years. And why don't we take a look at I want to look at this snippet from the documentary because, well, not only does it give the audience a good idea of the production values and what they're going to hear, but also we can see some of the really top shelf names that you got for this. Is extremely impressive. Let's look at this clip, which I'm calling Legends of the Genre.
I'm really fond of a movie called Prince of Darkness. This is like tremendous. That ending has to be one of my most favorite endings in the world. I recommend that movie highly. It scared me, and I thought about it for a while.
John Carpenter and I were good friends. And I said, I want to come down and watch you do some of the filming. And he says, okay, yeah, just come on down.
I put Alice in Prince of Darkness basically because he showed up. I said, oh, here, get in here.
And he says, you know that thing you do with the mic stand where you stick it through the guy on stage and it comes out the other end? And could we do that with a bicycle through this guy? And I went, sure. Next thing I know, now I'm in the movie.
So talk to us a little bit, Mike, about just the experience of working with all these people. Did you get starstruck? All that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, these are the biggest names in the industry.
I mean, I wasn't too starstruck. I think working at the Stern Show, I started meeting a lot of celebrities, and even before that, and a lot of the other work that I did. I mean, I've met Tom Cruise, Sigourney Weaver, like a lot of big time celebrities from work, just production work over the years. So in those early days, I was like, oh my god, this is so cool.
Mhm.
But after a while, it's like, all right, these are regular people who've had very amazing careers, and yeah, I mean, there were times when I'd still be kind of amazed that I'm hanging out with people like John Carpenter or Alice Cooper, spending an hour with Alice just talking and having them, have a lot of interest in what we're talking about, not just being there because they feel obligated, like they were actually really into it.
Right.
Because especially the musicians loved it, especially because when they do interviews, it's always the same thing. It's like, hey, tell us about the new album. What inspired this song? How's the tour going? So when you get someone who's talking about one of their passions, which is horror, they're just totally into it. And I remember when we're shooting the interview with Corey Taylor, it was before a Slipknot show out in Jersey, and I think he had a couple of interviews lined up before the show. Like that's when they do a lot of interviews and things when they're in different cities.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing the interview with Corey, and I think they told us ahead of time we'd get about a half an hour. I was like, all right, so let's try to get everything done in a half an hour. So a half hour passed, and right away, like a clockwork, his tour manager came up and said, hey, Corey, we got to get you to the next thing. And Corey just said, hey, just give me another 15 minutes because I'm on a roll here. So,
Right.
And I was like, dude, thanks so much. And he's like, no, but I'll talk about horror all day. I love it.
Well,
So,
that really came through for me watching the documentary, the Corey Taylor clips in particular. He was so enthusiastic about this and really getting into his personal history, and you could tell like you had touched a nerve with this guy. Like all of a sudden, he was kind of like us. He was like a nerd talking about the movies he would watch in high school. And so it was kind of endearing to see these people who, especially the metal musicians who we think of as hyper masculine. I mean, they're getting like all like freaking dweebs talking about about horror movies.
well, it's someone like Corpse Grinder, from Cannibal Corpse. When you see him on stage, he is just brutality personified. And just like swinging his head around, and it's just like vocals are so raw and rough and loud and everything. He looks like a monster on stage without any makeup or anything like that. And then when you talk to him, it's just like, he's just like a total geek,
Yeah.
in a good way. He was talking about wrestling and comic books and movies and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, he's like the kind of guy you'd run into like at a comic book store and, just become friends with.
That brings me to a question, and you might have just answered it, but who was the least out of all the people you met in this endeavor? Who was the least like you expected to find?
Hmm.
I know it's a hard one.
Because I mean, I don't think there was anyone that was, because I think I was familiar enough with each person, how they were on stage and off of stage, based on interviews and other things, that I wasn't surprised that they were how they were. And
Right.
of course, a lot of the horror guys and metal guys, even though they portray really violent characters on stage or in movies,
Mm-hmm.
they're still just regular people. They're performers, and they're putting on a show. And so, when you're talking to a lot of these guys who are just violent and ferocious on stage, I mean, it's right away you get a vibe from them as soon as they walk in the room, like who you're dealing with.
Right.
So,
Well, one of the people in the documentary that I was surprised who was so kind of sensitive and erudite, and well spoken was Dave Mustaine from Megadeth, and you know, it's not, those aren't really the adjectives that you normally hear when talking about him, but that's what was one of the great things about your documentary, is that you see these people in a slightly different way than you normally do, which is very interesting. Talk about Dave Mustaine. Like, what was it like hanging with, you know, this amazingly legendary metal guitarist who wrote all the classic Metallica songs?
Yeah, Dave was cool. I think I met him for the first time at NAMM out in California, and my friend Jose Mengen, who's you know, host of Liquid Metal on Octane on Sirius XM, he's always involved in something. So he was there. Then he introduced me to Dave, and I think we hooked up with management, and the manager said, yeah, you know, Dave would be into it. Let's schedule it. So it was surprisingly easy, because I think they were just into the subject matter or something different, you know, for Dave to talk about. So so yeah, we flew out to Dave's house, which was cool, and we shot the interview there. And he was just like, as soon as we got there, he was like, hey, you know, can I get you guys, you know? And I was there with my wife. We weren't married yet, but we were, you know, traveling together and shooting stuff. So he just welcomed us into his house and said, hey, you know, you guys want any coffee, water? You know, what can I get for you? And it was just like treating us like friends. You know, he just met us. We just walked into his door, and he's just like,
that's amazing.
So friendly. And we went in there, and as we're setting up, you know, we're just talking, having small talk and getting to know each other a little bit. And when just about when we're ready to roll, he's like, you know, I'm not really sure why they had me do this interview, because I'm not really like a horror guy. And I said, well, you know, I think you might be surprised. So, you know, once we finished, he's like, yeah, you know, I really did know a lot more about horror than I thought. And he is a horror fan, you know. I mean, he had a lot to say. Obviously, he's in the film a bunch of times, talking about horror and how he grew up with it and what he likes and everything. But yeah, he was a little surprised, maybe pleasantly surprised, that he was, you know, brought into something that he wasn't really expecting, and you know, didn't.
It seemed like you jogged some pleasant memories for him that he never really kind of put together himself, which is really, that's pretty cool, actually. Now, from Dave Mustaine, the early, to the guy who replaced him in Metallica, you, from what it seemed to me as an outsider on this project, even though I helped you film one day up in upstate New York, which was a great and very interesting day. But I wasn't really involved in this in any way, shape, or form, except occasionally hearing stories. But it sounded to me like you and Kirk became pretty tight. Am I wrong, or?
No, I wouldn't say tight. I mean, I don't have his number. I can't really call him up and be like, hey, Kirk, what's up? You know,
okay.
It's not that kind of thing at all. You know, my friend Rob, he's you know, much more, he's known Kirk for many more years. So they're friendlier. So, you know,
but
I don't really have that kind of relationship with him.
But Kirk was, in a sense, the inspiration for the project, because it was his convention where you sort of got the germ of the idea for this documentary. So talk about Kirk a little bit and why he was so influential. Like, what's his deal like with horror? And I mean, this guy seems obsessed.
Yep. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, Kirk grew up with horror since he was a kid, and he was a horror fanatic. So he'd have you know, he'd start collecting horror stuff since, you know, the early days. And he has a book called Too Much Horror Business, you know, where you can see a lot of photos of him as a kid, and a lot of his collections and stuff. So everything that we saw at his conventions, you know, it was just his, you know, his collection of stuff, props and posters. And he's a huge collector of horror memorabilia. He's like one of the biggest collectors that I know of. And he's put on a couple of shows. I think he's done some stuff up in Canada and elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, he trucked in like a lot of his stuff and set it up all over the convention. But yeah, so he was a fanatic, and he's like one of those, you know, hardcore horror fans. You know,
yeah.
I mean, all these guys, like a lot of these guys are horror fans, but you know, there's a difference between like a horror fan and a fanatic. You know,
and a fanatic.
Like collecting stuff, he knows everything about it, and he's just like always interested in meeting, you know, horror stars and everything like that. So that definitely inspired me, because you know, I mean, he brought both worlds together. It was metal and horror that whole weekend, and so he had that passion very early on of bringing those things together.
Now, did you start this documentary with the fully fleshed out idea of fusing metal and horror and talking about the history of both, or did it kind of develop over time into something as you got in? You started doing the interviews. Did it take any sort of different directions as you went, or were you singularly focused and that's what you got?
Yeah, I mean, things changed along the way. When I started out, I kind of put all my questions together, what I wanted to ask each person, and so there was kind of a generic list of questions that I wanted to ask everyone. But then, depending on who it was, I might ask specific questions about certain movies that they were in, or if they're musicians, how they incorporated certain things into their stage performances or whatever. Some different types of questions, and so a lot of the questions changed because then someone might mention something about horror album covers, right? I was like, oh, that's definitely a subject I want to expand upon,
Right.
So that started happening where someone would bring something up, and then I'd be like, oh, I want to create a whole section on what he just brought up.
Right.
So that would start to happen. Like there's certain sections about album covers and soundtracks that maybe initially I wasn't thinking about at the very beginning, but those are things that evolved along the way. So so there's definitely an evolution throughout the process, and also for people who get to watch it, there is a wraparound film. It's like a 13-minute wraparound story hosted by Michael Berryman, the horror legend.
Right.
So that's like a short narrative film that I put together. So that the idea for that wasn't there in the beginning. I knew I wanted to do kind of a wraparound film, but I wasn't sure what the concept was going to be until actually.
Now, for the audience's sake, what does that mean technically, a wraparound film?
So it's like, most documentaries are just kind of generic in their formula. Maybe you might have a host who talks directly to the audience and or narrates the documentary. Maybe you have a host that's going around traveling and talking to the audience that way too. So I wanted to have a host, but I didn't want it to be like a host that was just talking to the audience, explaining what the next chapter is going to be. I wanted it to be a narrative story that would help set up each chapter. So Michael Berryman's character does that, but in a different kind of way, in more of a fictional type of storyline.
Right, and that was the part that I was tangentially involved with. We went upstate. Actually, it was a really interesting day because you the coolest people. I mean, it's unreal. Like, I know nobody because I never leave my house, but the coolest people on earth. And we went up to this guy's I guess production soundstage studio, sort of warehouse, and he was the guy who did all the puppets for Little Shop of Horrors.
Well, he did. Bill Diamond. He has a studio up there. He used to work for Jim Henson.
Right.
Did a lot of stuff. He had some original props from Dark Crystal and a lot of different things. So he has a whole warehouse that he turned into a studio where they shoot a lot of stuff. So they have props everywhere. They have set pieces,
right,
lights and everything. So him and I became friends also through our mutual friend Rob. And I mentioned to him that I'm looking for shooting locations. He's like, yeah, just come up, we'll do it over here. I got all the set pieces, take whatever you want, put it together.
Right.
And he helped put it together. So yeah, after I think 2 days, we shot everything up there. But that's the thing. It's like when you have friends who have stuff that they can lend you,
right,
I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. Because I mean, the stuff that we put together could have cost, I don't know how much, but it would have, it would have blown my budget out tremendously.
Yeah, and I remember the vibe of that place was so cool, and it's like you and I go way back. Like my audience knows you primarily as the person who we walked around the Glenwood power plant together, and we have a video of that on our website. And of course, you and I have been doing the abandoned spots since the late '90s. Ever since we met, we were into that kind of stuff. So it was nice seeing that you incorporate a little bit of that into this documentary. And of course, I just have to show this because, well, William Shatner, you can't go through a show without showing, but look how you were so much younger here though.
Yeah, that was probably like 2014 or 15 or something like that too.
Right. Now, here's a character, I don't want to say character, but an individual who actually is a very important person in metal and who isn't generally known by the public, but I think he deserves a special shout out because he was very helpful to you in putting this whole thing together. So who are we looking at here?
So that's Brian Slagle, also executive producer. He really helped me out a lot in the beginning. I had known Brian for years. We, Brian just started Metal Blade Records, which is, of course, a huge label as far as metal goes, and helped
Was he
get
was he the
Metallica.
guy who signed? Yeah, was he the guy who signed Metallica?
Yeah. He started, finding a lot of metal bands out in California, and started putting mixtapes together, and he put Metallica like on the first tape, and that got out, and the rest is history. So yeah, he has a major role in getting Metallica started, of course. And I've known him, because Richard Christie actually introduced us, because Richard's band is under Metal Blade Records. So we had a couple of get-togethers in the city, and that's the first time I met Brian, and we kept in touch. And then I directed and shot a bunch of two of the Charred Walls of the Dam's music videos. So I was able to kind of talk to Brian along those times as well. So we kept in touch, and once I told him I was doing this project, he was all about it, because he's also a huge horror fan as well, on top of just knowing everything about metal. So Brian's an amazing guy. So I always
Well, he gets mad props from me just from wearing this Rainbow shirt, because as you know, I'm a huge fan of Rainbow, particularly this album, Rainbow Rising, 1976, one of the most classic albums. So Pierce Bones is asking, did he discover Metallica?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, Metallica might have happened anyway, but just to have someone really helping you push your music in those days when Metallica's sound was so different. I don't know what would have happened with Metallica. Who knows? Maybe they would have done a couple of shows. Maybe they wouldn't have gone anywhere. Maybe they would have broken up. Who knows? But Brian definitely helped push those guys forward. So he can definitely take the credit for that, for sure.
Yeah, I remember going to see Gojira with you way back, probably about 10 years ago now, at someplace near Gramercy Park. I'm not quite sure where it was.
The
Gramercy Theater. Yeah. Great show. Gojira is one of the greatest bands. And I remember going to that show with you, and all of a sudden I'm seeing you hanging, like, there's Brian Slagle, there's Eddie Trunk, you're shaking hands with this guy. Everyone seems to know you. It was very impressive. And so the fact that you parlayed all of these connections and all of this technical skill that you accumulated into making this documentary is super commendable. And really, it's just an amazing thing that you did. And one of the things that I think is so important about this documentary, kind of taking it back to the old school in a sense, is that this documentary also is meant to educate the viewer as well. And I think the best way to illustrate that is to show the following clip with all of these musicians talking about all of their great horror references that they love. So let's watch this, and then we'll talk about it.
I remember from a very early age watching Chiller Theater and Creature Feature, which were like on Channel 5 and/or Channel 11 on Saturday mornings. So, of course, like most kids, I was watching cartoons on Saturdays, but I was also watching horror movies.
We would watch Creature Features and Chiller Theater with the hand. I think it had 6 fingers. We always tried to count it. Sometimes the 4:30 movie, remember that? Then they would have like Dracula on the 4:30 movie, or Frankenstein.
They had this TV show called Ghost Host Theater. I believe it came on somewhere 10-ish to like 4-ish, and it would play like 2 to 3 horror movies. I remember a few times they played like Godzilla, then the Blob, and we used to just watch them. And that made me want to watch more movies.
They had this thing called the Sunday morning movie. That mixed with Twilight Zone, mixed with Outer Limits, mixed with Night Gallery. That was a lot of ammo to throw at a child, and I adored it. I loved it.
Well, first of all, that's a brilliant line. That's a lot of ammo to throw at a child. I love that line. But to a kid like a Gen Z or even a millennial watching who didn't grow up with the cultural references that we did, this is a gold mine, because in this documentary, they're all of a sudden now learning about Creature Feature, Chiller Theater, the 4:30 movie, the Ghost Host, and all this great sort of cultural these cultural artifacts from a different time. Which, if you're into this stuff, I mean, that's could be the coolest thing. So you did a real service. Did you set out to be educational in this documentary?
Yeah, I mean, I want it to be fun, but for people, because I knew that the fans would be into it. You know, if you're into horror and metal, like, you know, you're familiar with this stuff, and if you're a huge Corey Taylor fan, you hear Corey's in the documentary, maybe want to go check it out, and you hear that, you know, John Carpenter's involved in it, maybe want to go check it out.
Right.
But for people who are maybe not necessarily fans of the genres, I wanted to make something that would at least be interesting for them. So there's a lot of historical information in there about where horror came from, where metal came from. So I think people who are, and people have told me too, you know, like, you know, I'm not really a fan of metal or horror, but I really enjoyed the documentary. I learned a lot. And even people like Tom Savini, you know, I did a screening with him in Pittsburgh, and he said, you know, I learned a lot of stuff about, you know, metal that I never really knew about before, and this connection. So even people who've been in the business forever, they even learned something. So
well, it's very interesting that you say that, because that kind of anticipated one of my last questions before we go to our final topic. But what is the viewer going to learn? I know you don't want to give away all the secrets and all the spoilers, but generally speaking, what is the viewer going to learn from watching this documentary?
They're going to learn some historical stuff. Maybe if they didn't know a lot of the history of where horror came from, they might pick up on that. If they want to know where metal came from, you know, how it kind of started with the blues that turned into heavier rock and everything, you'll get some of that. And then just what a lot of these musicians and even horror stars, like how they grew up. You know, where did this influence come from? When did they first become fans of horror? You know, that's a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't know about. It's not something that they all kind of make public.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that was really cool, is that these aren't, you know, like if you really get into a person's biography, maybe you'll hear about some of this stuff, but not a lot. So I really try to draw out a lot of those stories from each person. So you'll definitely you'll learn a lot from the stories that everyone shares.
Right, and of course, everybody, Ruby's been putting the link where you can go and buy the DVD or Blu-ray. You can buy special signed copies. You can buy you can buy the video to stream for a very nominal fee, I might add. So everyone should go out and definitely watch this documentary. So Mike, I know that we're coming up on an hour.
I just want to say for Pierce, because he really wants to know what Phil Anselmo was like.
Hold on. Wait. What is Phil like?
Yeah. So Phil was cool. The funny thing about that was we set up for his interview in the room where this was at his Housecore Horror Festival. He put it on his own show. So we set up a room, said, hey, we're going to be up in room so-and-so at whatever time, you know, why don't you come up when you're ready? We'll do the interview. So as soon as he gets up there, he sees all the lights and cameras and all this stuff. And I think he wasn't really sure what was going on, because he just kind of stood there and looked at us, looked around, and he thought we were shooting a porno or some weird snuff film or something like that. So it took him a second to kind of, you know, understand what we were up to. But he was really cool, and I ran into him a couple of times since then, and he was always just really down to earth and very friendly. Gave me a hug a bunch of times, and so Phil was great.
Cool. All right. Yeah, Pierce. And if anyone has any questions, we're still going to have Mike for a couple minutes as we close the show out. So if anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. We'll be glad to get to them. So of course, an interview like this couldn't end, Mike, without the inevitable question. What is your preferred? I'm not going to say favorite, because no one ever really has a favorite. But if you were to say your top 3 horror movies and your top 3 metal bands.
Horror, it's tough, because I'll be in a certain mood for something for a while, and then I'll kind of be over it. But you know, as far as horror stuff, it's a lot of the same things that most people, you know, a lot of people will say The Shining, The Exorcist, you know, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, those are some of the biggest, the most, you know, amazing horror films. But I like some of the more obscure stuff. I love, you know, stuff like Return of the Living Dead. You know, if I just want to have a good laugh and have a good time with it.
Right.
In the Mouth of Madness, also by John Carpenter, is like one of my favorite horror films. You know, more obscure. Also something like Serpent and the Rainbow, you know, Wes Craven, you know, something that doesn't get a lot of love. I thought it was awesome.
Right.
And, you know, but then of course, and I'm a huge fan of the Elm Street movies, the franchises, you know, Friday the 13th.
Right.
I mean, there are too many to name, so it's really hard to pick a favorite.
Although I'm going to name two because maybe not your favorites, but certainly ones that you and I have bonded over. Well, the first, of course, is Cabin Fever, Eli Roth. I mean, the pancake scene, I'll never forget how much we rewound it, and every time we were dying laughing. And, you know, Cabin Fever is kind of a weird movie because when you watch it the first time, you're thinking it's a horror movie, but then when you're done, you realize it was kind of a comedy. And anyway, great movie. And of course, the classic, which I actually bought, one of the very few things I own, Mike, The Dentist. Filth. The Dentist is really kind of a very disturbing movie.
Yeah, if you got a thing about teeth being drilled, you know, you can have a hard time with it.
Corbin Burnson plays the dentist, and of course, now every time anyone says the dentist, I have to say the dentist, the dentist. Wait, now I'm caught in this loop. The dentist, the dentist, the dentist, the dentist. Don't say the dentist, the dentist. So, and of course, I know it's hard to pick, but like, what are your your preferred? Because there's a million genres of metal. Like, what are you into nowadays?
I don't know. I'll kind of flip around a little bit. You know, I get into Lamb of God every now and then. Some of the early Ghost stuff. Some of the Metallica classics, of course. I mean, you know, still love Metallica. I mean, they're still like the biggest metal band or whatever. But going to their shows is always amazing. And of course, you know, when I saw them at the Stern Show, 8 feet in front of me,
right?
You know, that was pretty kick ass. But yeah, I mean, you know, I like Slipknot. I like you know, Avatar. I like you know, just a bunch of different bands. But I can't really settle on any, you know, any few. It's like I love to hear new stuff all the time because I'll get into something for a while and then I'll kind of get tired of it. And I don't want to get sick of it, so I'll just kind of put it away.
Right.
But yeah, like some of those are the bands that I kind of come back to every now and then.
I just want to show a quick picture. This is gonna be funny because this is a person that connects me and you. Hold on, let me stop screen sharing. And it's just very ironic the way this all came about. Of course, we're talking about Sue Tropio. Now, Sue Tropio is. I was blown away when I found out that you knew Sue Tropio because I knew Sue Tropio, and of course, who is or was Sue Tropio? Do you remember? Of course, you remember.
Jeez, when was this?
This is 2014. Now, Sue Tropio was Metallica's manager. She worked for Q Prime, and she was in charge of Metallica.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sue and I maybe met once at one of their offices.
Right.
I actually forgot. Yeah, I mean that's when we were doing the Stern Show thing because I remember I was producing a behind the scenes segment of the Stern Show, Metallica on the Stern Show. So I think I had to be in touch with Sue,
right,
and a few other people in their Manhattan office,
right.
So yeah, I think we might have had a few interactions. But yeah, that was back in 2013, so that was a while ago.
Yeah, this was 2014. Interestingly enough, after I met her at New York Botanical Garden.
Mm-hmm.
we were both students at the time. I hadn't yet started teaching there, although by this time I was. And we became so close and such good friends. And it had nothing to do with music. I couldn't have cared less about Metallica. It was just all about like gardening. That she actually came down to my farm in Puerto Rico. And this is her on the farm working. We spent a week together planting trees and let's see more, you know, like putting in stuff into the ground and driving all over the island. It was a wild time. So anyway, enough about that. That's boring. But it's funny to see these people like like that was Metallica's basically their manager, and you would never guess, right? And then of course she wanted to become a gardener. It's also sort of weird stuff.
Yeah, sometimes they do it and then they kind of get burnt out in the system also, and then they would just want to do other stuff. So
exactly,
I think gardening is a lot more, you know, relaxing than having to deal with touring and producing albums and like all that kind of stuff.
Exactly, dealing with Lars Ulrich. No, I said it, not you. So anyway, Mike, so that was great, and I'm really, really excited for you. Everyone out there, please check out MAS. What is it? MAS Productions.
Well, that's my production company, but yeah, if they want to know more about metal and horror, go to metalhorror.com. And then from there, you can get just pretty much all the information. Anything you want to know, everything's on the site. You could also buy CD, like the DVDs and Blu-rays directly from me. That's the way I make the most money that way, although it is available elsewhere. But yeah, if you do that, if you stream through Vimeo, that's also the best option. But it is available on Amazon and Apple TV and all the other ones. So that's there. And then if you want to follow on social media, it's at The Metal Horror on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So yeah. And
All
feel
right.
free to reach out anytime if you have any other questions, after this. I'll be happy to get back to everybody.
Cool. Yeah. And everyone, Ruby has put the link into the chat several times, and it's also in the description. So it's very easy for you to link up to that and definitely give this documentary a look. It's very informative, entertaining, well edited, well shot, well put together and produced. I'm very proud of my friend Mike Schiff. So Mike, I want to say thank you for joining me today. If you wouldn't mind, just hang out backstage and while I take the audience on out, and we'll say goodbye off the air. All right.
All right, Manny. Thanks so much, and thanks for all your years of friendship. It's been many years of great times, and I look forward to many more.
You definitely know it, my man. All right, thanks. All right, take care.
All right, everybody.
All right, everyone. Great show. Super happy to have my boy Mike Schiff on. You all have seen him walking around Glenwood Power Plant. Of course, we didn't get into how Mike and I wanted to do a Son of Sam movie many, many years ago, but maybe that'll be a topic for another show. So anyway, so give Mike's documentary a look, pick one up, DVD, Blu-ray, maybe stream it if that's your fancy. But definitely give it a shot, because if you're into metal and you're into horror and you want to see how the two interact and fuse, well, Mike put it together for you guys. It's all there waiting for you. All right, guys. So thank you so much. And we will see you at the next show. Take care. Thanks.